Rolling. Welcome, everybody. February 1st. I'm now losing track of how many weeks it's been since EOS independence, so I think we can stop counting now. But welcome, everybody.
We've been out of release since then, a full release 3.2.
There you go. So, welcome, everybody. Brian will be joining shortly. In the meantime, it's been brought up. There's a couple of topics we might want to discuss. One is some release updates. Dune, we can hear from Stephen on the news there. Ubuntu 18 support, and some topics suggested from Matthew regarding changes to 3.2 that had caused some configuration issues. But maybe we can start with the easy release updates, Stephen.
Sure thing. So I guess it was last week or the week before we released v1.1.0 for Dune. Main thing that I had mentioned previously there was just greater flexibility around the version dependency across Leap and CDT repos. There's a couple of other bits that you can see here, including some packaging for Windows. Just note there that the Chocolatey approval from their team is still in process, which is why the package is attached directly to this release right now. And beyond that, you can see we've also introduced this Dune plugin extension, as well as just the ability for dynamic updates. So just capability to upgrade to the latest Dune image version. Those are some of the big take homes there. I think in the next release, we'll look to kind of catch up on the Mac side in terms of packaging. There's some work in progress there, but it didn't quite make the cut. So just some incremental progress there. We've got some new teammates that have made some really meaningful contributions there. I think maybe 3 people that report into Bucky had their first bits of contributions to a release in this, which is pretty exciting for us to just have those contributions going a little bit wider. And I think even a couple of community members had some contributions as well. So that's kind of the majority of, I think, what's worth talking about here.
Great. Thank you. And so why don't we move? Any questions on that before we move on to the next topic? All right. So why don't we jump into, maybe before we get into Ubuntu 18, the topic that you had suggested, Matthew, probably best to have Brian for that. So I think Brian to get into.
Brian is here.
Oh, hey, Brian.
Should be a relatively short conversation, it should be relatively short either way. Want me to jump into it real quick?
Sure.
So Ubuntu, the original goal we had set was that we would support 2 active releases of Ubuntu for the block producers. So that's now 2204 and 2004. So we're now coming out saying we'd like to deprecate 1804. It just makes it easier on the build teams, devs teams. We had a very long debate inside engineering yesterday about boost libraries and the boost libraries that come prepackaged on each release of Ubuntu, et cetera, et cetera. So Canonical, who supplies Ubuntu, is dropping free support for Ubuntu 1804 on April 30th of this year. That doesn't mean they're dropping all support. You're happy to pay for it. They'll happy to take your money. But we would like to say that we would like to deprecate and say we're not supporting 1804, and possibly even as early for the 4.0 release that will come out sometime around March. We want to say 1804 will not be supported for that release. And we want to know, it's kind of like, how do you tell if someone's using a server? You unplug it. So this would be the point where we're waiting to hear someone start screaming, saying, oh my God, I can't get off of 1804. My life depends on it. So we're queuing that up because we want to tell you now it's deprecated and it will go away in the 4.0 release, which will come out in the Marchish timeframe.
And of course, I think just adding on top of that, this release isn't a consensus upgrade or anything, so nobody has to do this. Right. So it's not hopefully the end of the world, but just wanted to feather in that bit as well.
Yes, my question is why didn't you drop it out of 3.2 if the plan is to just support 2 releases?
Well, I think because at the 3.2 time, 2204 was not released yet, right? So it was still 2004. Yeah, it was. You're right. I'm wrong. So you're right. We should have. So we screwed up.
We were being nice. That's
I was about to say,
that?
don't hate them because they kept it around one last
I
time.
don't know, just asking in case there was some.
It'll be nicely packaged into the next major release. By the way, it doesn't work on old shit anymore.
We will exercise self-flagellation after this. So it sounds like everyone's okay with it. We probably will try to run a little tighter windows because it helps on the boost libraries and the builds. We're coming out with some strategic build changes, which will make a lot of this simpler going forward. It is the crux of a lot of the engineering discussions that we debate, all these builds and releases and hair pulling, teeth gnashing, and all that good stuff. So thank you. It sounds like we're okay with that. I don't know how we'll communicate that more broadly, Daniel, other than people can watch this video. Brian, this is your area. You might want to communicate with Patty and Zach and see if they want to get it into the EOS Everything weekly update, or however we generally communicate it. If they're, if we want to go into the block producer channels and just start to, telegram that, and, maybe Matthew can help you in some of the more esoteric channels.
I think one of the more questionable ones that I don't have clarity into yet is just how we can figure out what exchanges might be running and whether they need to do something different now. So, well,
again, they don't have to do the upgrade to Stephen's.
Right.
Like when we come out with this and it only compiles on 2004 and 2204, when they go, oh, gee, I'm only on 1804, the answer is, okay, you don't have to do the upgrade. But by the way, when we get to that consensus upgrade 5.0 in September, you will need to be on at least 2004.
Yeah. The fact that there's not a force upgrade, not a consensus, it's just well documented in the release notes even. And when they see it for the first time, oh, I guess I can't upgrade now. Better start upgrading. I got 6 months before the next consensus upgrade.
It's not going to be the first time they stumble upon 1804. Where's that dinosaur still doing? Now, mind you, I have 100 nodes I've got to upgrade now, but that doesn't mean that I'm oblivious to the fact that, Windows 95 doesn't work either.
Yeah, so like when we did the last consensus upgrade, I think I had one person complain that 1604 was not supported anymore, and I told them to go away. Just upgrade. So anyway, I don't have a problem with this. I used to work in HP software, and we have exactly this discussion every time about every release that every customer wanted support. Can you still support Solaris 8? No. Upgrade. Actually,
perfect. I love that.
Yeah, so I understand the whole discussion, so I'm good with it. So let's just stick with the 2 releases, and we're good.
So that's 2204 and 2004. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. There's a release every 2 years. So the next one will be 2404.
All right.
Unless they change their release plans, but they're pretty consistent recently. So
cool. Anyone else? Anything to add to that topic? All right. And Brian, I don't know if you had any thoughts for topics for today. Matthew did raise one in the chat that is rather timely.
So the last time I was here 2 weeks ago, we did some topic brainstorming, but I think given the timeliness of Matthew's topic, it would make sense to go into that now.
Cool. So let me introduce it, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yesterday I was having fun debugging why the API nodes were having high CPU load and seemingly not serving API requests. It turns out that the CPU execution limit was changed or how it was calculated was changed in 3.2. The release notes was lacking in this area to explain the impact of the change. And anyway, at the end of it, there's kind of 2 issues open, one about this change specifically, and one about adding more debugging to make it easier to debug these sorts of issues. So Kevin and I had quite a discussion yesterday on this. So I don't know what the best way to approach this. Maybe Kevin You want to summarize the thinking behind what was the changes in 3.2, and then we can discuss from there. I think it's good to discuss so that everybody's aware of what's changes, because the node operators are going to need to make a configuration change when they upgrade to 3.2, which I didn't do ahead of time. So, all right.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and also I think there's potentially some areas where we may want to pivot according to feedback that we receive, from you and from others on this call here in terms of like the way this works currently. So historically, the API calls were one of the ways that you could pause block production by more than say 10 milliseconds. And I bring that up because back in Block 1 days, when they were running hackathons, or not hackathons, when they were running their bug bounty, that was one of the ways that they would pay out, is any way that you could keep a node from not producing a block for 10 milliseconds. Well, one way that was accomplished was by creating API requests that took longer than said 10 milliseconds. And there was a number of those that we fixed, a number of those that we paid out over time, having to do with time that it took to convert blocks to JSON, for example, which is very relevant to the example that Matthew is talking about here. And because of that, there was a lot of changes that were made. So there's a limit for ABI serializer max time that was added at some point in the past that limits how long the ABI serializer is allowed to run, and that's the amount of time that the block is being converted from its binary form to its JSON expanded form, with all the action data expanded as well within that JSON. That's that limit, and that all happens on the main thread, even as of today. Even the very main branch of the code still does that all on the main thread. Now, over time, there was added an HTTP max response time, which originally was this idea that we would expand that option to eventually include the entire time that an HTTP request was happening. Its initial implementation, though, was much simpler. It was simply to limit the amount of time of actually converting binary data into JSON of the form that weren't covered by the ABI serializer. So there are different ways of converting things into JSON. One is using this ABI serializer, which expands the action data. There's putting things into JSON without doing that step, which is just taking binary and converting it direct to JSON, not using the ABI serializer. So this new limit originally only controlled how long it took for a conversion of data to JSON outside of the ABI serializer stuff. So it had a very limited use case in terms of what it actually enforced. But the idea was always, when it was originally put in, that it would cover the entire time frame. There was an issue, it's PR 96, which unfortunately, for whatever reason, did not make it into the release notes at all. So there is, I think, there's a description on that PR that I wrote that tried to explain this. Now, as Matthew's pointed out, it could have been better, and I agree with that. In terms of what it was trying to communicate. But what we did was actually two things in that pull request. One was there was a number of API endpoints that had just hard coded in the code. There's no way of changing it. 10 millisecond run times. Particularly, the easiest one to think about is like get table rows. And so it would just run for 10 milliseconds and return as many rows as it could within that 10 milliseconds and return that data to you. Now, sometimes what it could return to you in 10 milliseconds was actually no rows, and you would just get nothing back. But that was, people worked around this forever. They have to make a call and see what the more is, and then make another call. Unfortunately, there's this whole corner cases of data could be added between those calls, blocks could be processed. Anyway, so one of the things that happened, this PR, which is kind of like what it's described as mainly, is that in a number of API endpoints, and they're listed in that pull request, that we removed that hard-coded 10 millisecond limit and instead said, well, we will now honor the HTTP max response limit instead of this hard-coded limit. Now, we also provided for each of those a new option within the request where the requester could say how long, if they wanted, to limit that particular call. And so then it would take the minimum of the node operator configured max response time and the limit requested in the URL. So that was one part of that pull request. The other part of that pull request was to actually honor that HTTP max response time across all chain API endpoints, including get block. Now, what that means is that get block used to be limited really only by the API serialization time. It's now limited by the minimum of max response time and ABI max serialization time. And so that change is what Matthew tripped over, was the fact that I assume he had ABI max serialization time set rather large. I think a lot of people do. And they had, and you had max response time, I believe set at 30 milliseconds. 30 milliseconds is not enough time to convert these large blocks into JSON.
It was set to 300, actually.
300, okay. Oh, the max response time?
Yeah.
And what was your ABI max serialization time set to?
Hold on, I'll check.
Larger than that, I assume.
Keep going, I'll get the number.
Yeah. So, well, I think I've wrapped that up. I think I've hopefully described the change there, the thinking and why we did what we did. So
yeah, so like the why we did what we did is good background. I think I guess the request from my side is, well, can we go back one? Easy thing. Can we go back and just revise the release notes for 3.2 and just, add a few notes in there? I think that would be good. So, we capture this later. And then two, Kevin and I, we started discussing this, a little bit ago, is like, maybe we would need different limits for get block versus get table rows, because get table rows can be, huge and generate huge load. And I don't know, I don't have any control over that. Right. But, get block, it's like, well, if somebody wants to block, then I'll send them the block, whatever that amount of time it takes. It feels to me like those are two different kind of requests. Maybe I'm wrong, but I thought maybe, I would bring that up in case other people have opinions on thoughts here. And I'd really like to hear from Aaron as well on this, since Aaron, you get tons of API requests, and I know you're looking at lots of details on this. Maybe.
Yeah, I can chime in. I agree that get block should just return. Like, if somebody asks for a block, we need to return it, regardless of how strenuous it is. Your comments on GitHub about, like, APIs aren't going to be serving these requests, so we're not concerned about that.
Block
Windows
producers.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yes. It's early.
It's okay. It's okay. I knew what you meant. I'm just clarifying for everybody else.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I preferred the previous behavior, because then you have this global limit that throttles all the other requests, like get table rows, like you were concerned about. And then get block is kind of this special thing unto its own for that reason. I guess one alternative I can potentially offer is, could we have a get raw block, like we have a get raw ABI call, and then maybe let the client handle deserialization, so that way this isn't even just as heavy of a call? I know that's a long-term fix. It's not something we're going to be able to roll out and then everybody's going to use it. I mean, people still use lots of old API endpoints. The long-term, like, having that heavy lifting done by the client might be the solution to this. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we've long talked about that. I think there's already an issue somewhere about adding the get raw block, and we should be doing that, particularly since even our ABI serialization that we're doing is happening at the time of the get block call, not at the time of when the block was created. So the ABIs that we're actually even using for that serialization isn't even the correct ABIs, which results in not all the data actually being expanded correctly. Where a client, if he was using the raw, could certainly do a better job of that in terms of like knowing which ABI should be used for a given block. And most of the history solutions out there, do a much better job of that than the actual get block call that Nodes provides, which is buggy. It is maybe the way to describe that.
Right. Another thing I was kind of looking at, and I didn't say anything in the Telegram chat yesterday, but that same block for the trace API returns in, I don't know, almost 10 times faster. And that's because the trace API has it written out to disk, I'm assuming, and it just reads the static data. If Git block could mirror that, or the trace API's output or something like it could mirror the Git block call, that might be a way to further optimize that. And then if there were some sort of trimming on that, we wouldn't be able to offer every block at that size, because I think the trace API for EOS, if we did that, is something like 70 terabytes or something, because it's everything unfolded and deserialized. But a limited subset of that, as I was just doing the testing, I did notice that the trace API was blazingly fast comparatively.
Yeah, it is. It's much faster. Plus, it's all multi-threaded, and none of it hits the main thread. So it's faster, and it doesn't even interfere with anything else that Nodes is doing. And it can handle as many threads as you throw at it. So you can really service a lot of requests on that endpoint. But you're right. It is a different format of the Git block. The data it provides, although similar, is not the exact same format.
Yeah. I mean, I know I kind of dove into alternative ideas I had, which wasn't necessarily the point, but for feedback, like I do think that having Git block be able to service blocks, and having Git table have some other kind of, or everything else have some other kind of limit. Maybe the block is moved to a different namespace and we have time limits per namespace or something along those lines.
I think like Git block is interesting because digging into the implementation, it's actually somewhat unfortunate the way that plays out because of the discussion about the ABI max serialization. So there's already a knob there, and the folding in of those two doesn't like it enforces the minimum, but it does it in a kind of a crazy way, where it actually runs for the max ABI serialization time and then checks the deadline after that. And so it's actually done all the work already, and then it kills it, which is why in the logs that Matthew put up wherever that was at, it showed that the deadline was exceeded by such huge amounts because it had actually already done all the heavy lifting. It had just like checked it at the very end before it sent a response saying, "Oh, you overflowed." So really, I think
it's like totally useless. We did all the work and then we throw it away.
Yeah, exactly. So I think for Git block, really, we could. I'm speaking a bit out of turn here because this is not my call, but I think we could do a very simple patch release and it would effectively go back to the way it was, in that it would really only honor the ABI max serialization time, which is what it's always done up until the 3.2 release.
And by the way, my ABI serializer time is set to 2000.
Yeah. So that makes sense.
Yeah, we're at 5 on our end, 5,000.
Yeah, so that still allows you to like set a limit of some time, but it is now interesting enough. That node, because of that can actually pause syncing on your node for up to, in your case, 5 seconds with 5,000. Which it sounds like you guys are okay with that, but just that's what that setting means.
Yeah, I mean. The challenge is, serving requests in a reasonable way and syncing blocks are in conflict. So there's never a perfect solution. The solution that I have been talking about a lot is, one node does one thing, and you limit the impact, right? So you never put a block producer node available to the public who's going to run stupid API requests against it. So.
And I think that was a mistake that happened in the past in terms of like paying out hacker submittals, the fact that, well, hey, I can do an API request and pause your block production. Well, okay, yeah, you should never really do that. So yeah, but
Yeah,
but instead we tried to fix it, right? Which is like,
Yeah, so I think maybe we should. I'll propose. You guys can discuss. Is it time to revisit that decision? And we put a whole bunch of knobs in here to prevent that. But preventing that was not the right thing, and it should just be clearly documented that never run a block producer connected to any API endpoint that you're going to abuse. Right? Be very careful about what API requests you send to a block producer. And then using that as the baseline, then let's review all the configuration and how things are handled, and then maybe change some behavior or remove some extra configuration that's not needed or whatever.
Yeah, I was going to ask a question related to that. It seems like, and maybe I didn't follow everything yet, to be honest, but it seems like some of this is caused fundamentally by the fact that like we might actually want different behavior for different kinds of nodes. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. And so to your point, if we sort of take a strong opinion, like make it opinionated that like, look, block production nodes should never be offering these public things, then it sort of changes the nature of what the potential solutions might be, right?
Correct.
I guess I asked one question, just thinking of it a different way, is, I mean, most of us enable the API because we use it for get info or,
we need it for get info, right?
But we're still always and I mean, it just kind of opens up and let's go. And oh God, don't enable producer API, because then that turns on, switches that at least they're isolated in a namespace. But what if it more just said, look, if you're running block production, if I see that I'm configured to, schedule block production, shut down all that. Don't shut down get info, because we, that's a fundamental one that at least we could use to monitor. But shut down all the rest of, if block production is the concern that's kind of crippling the thought process of, well, that's why we did it. Just, okay, you're signing blocks. We take care of that for you. You want to know why half of your API shit doesn't work? Because you shouldn't do that on a block producer in any case. Therefore, we just kind of turn it off. And then it's more free reign on the other aspect. Is that, I don't know. I mean, is that maybe an easier way?
The con of that is the fact that, people use like a private network for like app development and that sort of thing. So, you don't want to force, somebody that's wanting to just run a simple little chain and do a simple little test to actually have to run two nodes, right? One that's doing their block production, quote unquote, producing their blocks, and then another to do their API calls.
Developers, it's totally fine that they run everything in one, but developers
do it that way.
Who cares if your block is delayed a bit? Who cares? It's a development thing. It doesn't matter.
Well, that's more why I say is, if you default and say that it won't do it in a block production, but if you want to override it and, okay, you don't want us to disable all of that and you have block production enabled, which is the default. Oh, you're also signing with the default EOS key or whatever it is that comes, is that
easy?
Yes,
I want really stupid way of doing things equals true option.
That's what developers do in their own environment, right? Or we do on Jungle.
Too, like semantic options, so that so in other words, like BP mode, dev mode, API mode, that sort of thing, and then you can override with more specific options if desired. But that's like,
I do think maybe the HTTP being all bundled together might be some of the source if it were more segmented out, like producer.
Yeah, get info always comes up in these conversations. It might be time to move it somewhere different, or make it more special than it is. It's already special, by the way, but we can make it even more special.
One thing we do that I've always kind of wanted it to do by default is at the root endpoint, like the / with no path, we serve get info out there. Like if you go to eos.grandmass.com, it shows you get info. Like that
Correct.
is a very logical place to just put the info. Like if we want to make it that much more special, let's make get info the root API call of it.
I agree with that. I'll also counter argument. I mean, you're running a web service, therefore it gets hit with a root request. You're now loading up one of the heaviest calls I think it has, right? I mean, get info can be pretty. I thought it was heavy.
No,
I don't think so.
No, get info is not bad. And matter of fact, we except for the fact that I think most of you guys cache the results anyway. Like we should probably just move it off the main thread.
We do the same thing only because I got tired of getting told my endpoints were down because somebody would click on the address I give them, and that's the sole reason. Matthew has a beautiful little statistics summary page.
Yeah, I just
that
put a
might also be
splash
interesting.
page there, and I call get info in the background to make it look pretty.
Right. So I definitely think something other than 404 endpoint not found. So anyway, I would
slightly
secondary
off topic, but yeah.
right. But yes, I tend to agree. Is maybe that might be a better way of doing it. Is get info carved off separately, because that's, at least to me, really the only reason why we're running even HTTP on a block producer node.
Yeah, I mean, I have to turn it on every node because that's the only way to monitor what's going on. Right. Now, once we have Prometheus, then maybe I don't need it.
I push for a get info.
Michael doesn't want Prometheus. Anyway, whatever.
I want a better get info.
Prometheus requires HTTP plugin as well. So I mean, you get it either way.
Oh, even better.
Yeah.
So but maybe that is kind of the path to go down on there. But I would agree that might be an easier way of isolating. You want to run HTTP requests, go willy-nilly, but you don't have to do it. It'd also probably be nice to be able to never mind.
Yeah, so anyway, Brian, have you captured all the ideas here? So we have
in a really rough form. I'm going to have to probably do some offline discussion to refine it. But I wanted to make sure I understood one thing, because I was going to ask the question and then it seemed like you guys kind of answered it, which is like, why do BPs need to be running get info? It sounded like it's mostly for internal monitoring. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Okay. We need to know the node is in sync.
Okay.
Health checks, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's one way that get info is special. It runs at a much higher priority than any other HTTP request.
Yeah. Okay.
And one comment regarding the idea of modes, like operating modes. I think rather than that being a development thing, it could be an educational thing, just to let people know this. Although it would be cool to have flags. You set developer mode, now everything's running. You set BP mode, and now it's only the producer plugin and the limited subset of APIs. You set API mode or peer-to-peer mode or whatever, and it kind of defaults to some stuff. Like that could be cool, but it could also be done through education if development resources are sparse.
Yeah, what I've noticed is like looking at the Cosmos chain, they're very, very clear about how you need to run it, like 3-tier architecture. Here's your public endpoints, here's your private peering things, and here's your block or validator at the very back, and it's protected by its multiple layers. Okay, we do the same thing in EOS, but where is it documented anywhere on the developers.eosio? Nowhere, right? So other chains just solve this problem with very good, clear documentation that explains the rationale behind setting up this kind of system.
Yeah, I mean, I think my gut reaction to that is that it makes sense that like a BP level node operator would need to, or at least benefit from understanding what the flags are and why you would set them, that sort of thing. But you're sort of like your dev, potentially can get away with not knowing those things if there's some easy, smart default that, anyway.
I don't know. I think you're thinking that BP operators know more than they actually know.
Well, I mean, that's fair. Yeah.
Because like at the end of the day, like I set whatever the ABI serialized time to 2000. I don't know. There was some discussion in the Telegram group. I don't know. Put 2000. I don't know. It seems to work. Great. Right. It's not like I did an in-depth study to figure out what the right value is there.
So
ideally, the documentation has a whole page on why this option exists, Why is the default? What do you need to set it? Why do you change it? Now the documentation exists.
Whether we do
Kevin's
it through options or flags or just documentation, it would be helpful to sort of conceptually categorize the modes, if you will, right? So
Absolutely.
So there's BP mode, there's relay mode, there's API mode, there's dev mode. What else?
Well, it depends on how detailed you want to get. You could call there's like ship mode. There's
Is there
also
public chain mode, private chain mode? Would there be any difference in?
There's also block
scenarios?
relay node versus transaction relay node, where you just call it a relay node. So
Yeah, I mean, I was about to say, in some of these conversations, it was about 8 or 9 different. There was a snapshot node that was a role.
Snapshot node, yeah.
You had your public API,
Public seed or peer-to-peer.
public peer, private
Internal
peer.
Yeah.
There's a
There,
whole subcategory of APIs as well. Whether
Yeah.
this is your block node for APIs, this is your get table node, this is your generic node. You have a push node, you have a compute node.
I'll say this, I even have ship nodes that are with console logging or without. Maybe APIs even have that same, but some things still require that, which dramatically change the ship logs and it changes the node. So like I say, I'm finding that's actually a separate dedicated role. And I need to know, I can't move from this ship server to that ship server because they're not the same. So I don't know if that granularity, but
I don't know, like we have dev nodes. So for the developers working on smart contracts, right? There's an API endpoint just for them, which is kind of secret, private endpoint.
Not
But yeah,
anymore.
it has developer options enabled, like console logging, right? So they can get that up. So yeah, that's a different. So yeah, there's probably like 10, 12 different kinds of nodes if you get into the very specific details. I would love if we could have less.
Yeah. Like
DeepMind, you have a DeepMind node,
part
right?
of it could be like,
DeepMind,
these roles are pretty similar, so maybe these are actually just flavors of the same role, that sort of thing.
They are. I mean, you've got major roles like the plugins. I mean, that's really kind of what a lot of it is. Your ship plugin, peer-to-peer, ACTP. But then you've got the different options underneath there, which are more like flags in the config file. But they actually are pretty impactful to things.
Yeah. So I can imagine, the minimum viable here just being documentation that says, if you are intending to do this, here are the flags you need, right? That sort of thing. And then, a more, sophisticated option, which may or may not be a good idea, is to actually like just build them in as some kind of, distinct option that sort of bundles features. So here's what I'll do with regards to this. I'll do some, shuttle diplomacy, I call it, where I'll talk to, individual, node operator folks to generate and refine a list of those conceptual roles, because I'm sure you guys have already discussed this many times over, and it won't be too hard to sort of generate that. The hard thing will probably be just consolidating to the smallest possible list that covers the largest practical use cases. So I'll take that on. The other action item that I captured as an obvious thing that needs to be done is I will go back and revise the 3.2 release notes just to more clearly call out what we actually did with this. And then I did capture a lot of the ideas and specific requests related to this issue, but they're currently pretty rough due to just some gaps in my understanding. So that's going to also require me to do some offline kind of checking with people to fill it in. So
cool.
In the short term, for node operators that are anticipating upgrading to 3.2, are there any immediate instructions or warnings we should be giving them to avoid falling into the pitfall that Matthew encountered?
You need to increase the max HTTP time from 300 to 3,000 is kind of the instruction.
So more over 3,000 or more, is there a threshold we should be saying no less than
I don't know.
It might be easier just to say to increase it to be equal to or greater than your ABI max serialization time.
To increase the max HTTP response time to be at least equal or greater to your ABI serialization max.
Yes. I think that's the easy way to communicate what needs to be done to get people back to 3-1 behavior, if you will.
And maybe Node.js should complain if it's not that way.
Well, I would contend that like
Or not.
we should kind of get blocked. The way it's working right now, I think could clearly be described as a bug. So, that would be my recommendation, is that we get that in the next patch release, is we fix that small little behavior that get blocked is exhibiting right now.
Sounds
Cool.
good.
So just make sure I got that right. Increase max HTTP response time to be equal to or greater than your max realization time.
Yeah. Because if you're okay with setting your ABI max serialization time to a large value, then you are okay with pausing your block for that amount of time. So this now allows other things to pause it for that amount of time. So yeah.
Cool. And they should do that before upgrading. They're on 3.1 right now. Make sure you do this configuration change before you upgrade, or
While you upgrade.
after,
Yeah.
while you upgrade. Cool.
Part of your upgrade process.
All right. I see Denny commenting here on the topic of optimizing get table rows. Do we want to dig into that a little?
Yeah, I can just quickly. So most of the front ends, I'm sure Aaron realized this as well, is a lot of the front ends, because there's only limitations on how to request table rows on the Node EOS providers. They have to either go to diffuse or appearance or a custom version of a history provider, because they can't actually get specific data. Like, let's say you want to get multiple tokens from your balance. You literally have to do like 10 calls if you want to get 10 token balances, because you can't like craft a get table rows properly to get multiple different things. So one of the big use cases is just kind of like a get many, like give me 10 different things that have different ranges, like my EOS token balance, something else, and something else. Right now, you can't do that because you have to do like 3 different unique calls, because the only way that you can get a table row is just doing a lower and an upper bound. And it's really not that flexible. So I'm sure Aaron sees it. Just people just are brutalizing the endpoints because they just can't actually formulate a proper request. So maybe there's some ways that we can kind of optimize, if we're going into the optimization route of optimizing get block and get info and get table rows. There's probably some improvements that are really low hanging fruit on the get table rows. And I'm sure Aaron can expand on what he sees on his endpoints on the native ones, and what people just have to default to history solutions, like alternatives than Node EOS.
I can even tell you, we internally abuse Snot because, we do data gathering, and because they're local LAN, that 0 millisecond latency means I can rip the shit out of an API get table. And I'll count 8 million records every 5 minutes and calculate statistics off of them. So it's amazing how much you just have to abuse an API. And
you would still need to put
how much
limits.
You can.
You would still need to put some limits, to prevent abuse, maybe like a maximum of 1,000 rows. And, there's definitely a 8,000 row request is a little bit too intense, but people can batch them. And right now, the issue is you can't even batch like 5 because you're limited to what you can query out of a get table row request. So you just end up doing, 10 requests for 10 different, items that you want, which is a lot of load on the endpoints. And it actually makes some endpoints that have aggressive rate limits, you end up getting your website and your front end rate limited because you're doing 10 requests and you're kind of bursting.
Correct.
And then you get failed request because you got rate limited by the endpoint because you had to do 10 requests. You couldn't batch them, type of thing. So
that's what this change that triggered this conversation provides in 3.2 is that particularly if you're running a private node, you can set the limit very high, and then it no longer has the hard-coded limit. And so you can actually get all the table rows that you want in your request.
No, it's still limited in, because that's just per one contract and very limited to a lower and upper bound. So let's say if you have a contract with 10,000 rows, you can't do upper or lower bound. So an example is the atomic assets NFT contract. You cannot use lower and upper bound because you're just going to be scanning forever. So what you have to do is you have to craft, even though you're in the same contract, you have to craft very specific upper and lower bounds for exactly what you want, because you can't do the range because you're querying 10,000 entries in that table. There's a lot of use cases where what we have in features isn't really enough to query exactly what you want. So it's just an opportunity to kind of improve the get table rows. Maybe it's a new request. I don't know. Maybe Aaron has a lot of ideas on how to improve that get table row endpoint, but it could be a collaborative effort to improve that.
So it seems
this
like
would improve the experience for developers and reduce the amount of bashing on nodes or node operators. It's like improving across for node operators and for developers in one improvement.
Correct. Yeah, it's two improvements on both operator and the client side. I think Brian, you're.
Yeah, hang on one second. I want to take a note here. So.
Yeah, I think in that regard, like if we wanted to provide something that had that sort of querying capability and that sort of functionality, I would think that we'd want to go the route of providing that ability in a different executable, in terms of like not have the node actually doing that, but offload that into something else that they can service that request. I think of like what we had in 2.1, or I don't know if it was, I guess it was never released, but Rhodius, which would mirror all the state of Nodius, but provide multi-threaded queries, and it had a somewhat of like a GraphQL type interface that you could use to do those queries. And you could even craft WASM if your queries were complex enough that you actually needed a programming language to get the data. So that, I think some sort of approach like that, where kind of more of a full history of solution that's getting the table data. SHIP provides all that data out anyway, but I think building that into something else is probably the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't need to be entirely super advanced. It could just be some really, an improved key value store with a few fancy, scans, get prefix, get keys, get mini keys. It might not need to be too fancy, to not over-engineer the entire thing, but just a way to kind of get keys out of the contract states would be definitely a benefit. But yeah, I think definitely having it off the main thread for sure. That would be definitely beneficial for the operators.
This was
the sort of what's the word? The desire here is, I'm kind of restating and adding one to what Daniel said, right? So we want to improve the experience for developers with simpler, more efficient querying capabilities. We want to reduce bashing on API nodes by reducing the number of requests that are required by developers to perform common use cases. And related to that, we'd like to allow API nodes to protect themselves with more sane limits without breaking those legitimate use cases, right?
Yep, that sounds about right. And I'll send you whatever. I posted a few things in the chat, but I'll send you, maybe Brian, if you want to extend that as an issue, I can send you extra details.
And then, Kevin's point is this might be better served as a purpose-built application rather than options on Node.js, right?
Mm-hmm.
Another source of material on this is the API Plus paper that was written or released about a year ago. The first proposal in there was to establish kind of a group to research how to optimize these kinds of APIs, because they I said it in the VP chat yesterday, like get table rows is begging to be hammered. Like you do the query, it says more, and you're like, okay, I'm going to query for more because it didn't give me everything I needed. Like the rapid succession of API requests is kind of baked into that protocol, but there might be some easy wins, but ultimately like a new API to access state, I do think is the long-term goal. It's just determining what the access patterns to that state are going to be. I don't know it. We didn't know it when we were writing the API Plus paper, and that's why that kind of turned into a generic proposal to come up with a group to figure that out. This kind of is a group that could help figure that out. But like something eventually needs to replace get table rows to solve this problem. And maybe along the way, there's some band-aids to make it more optimal, but it's definitely, it's a Swiss Army knife of an API endpoint. It does kind of everything, and it doesn't do any of it all that well. Like as you know, if you had a specialized tool.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is that small little band-aid in 3.2, which if you look at the pull request that I linked there, 96, it describes that, how you can use the get table row a little bit better, but small band-aid, but little one.
All right. Good discussion today.
Yeah. And we're
Looks
coming
like
up towards the end of the hour. Anything to add for anyone? Sorry, go ahead, Matthew.
I was just going to say, it feels like a good place to stop. Before we can pull up some other huge topic that's going to take it.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't add on any topics. But any final thoughts on the topic at hand?
No topic. I think we've covered everything on that
Cool.
get table.
All right.
Big topic.
It's a massive
Brian,
topic.
anything on your side? Any thoughts for? Do we want to discuss what will be the topic for next week, or get people in that mindset?
Possibly. Before we do that, real quick, so this last topic we discussed, I think, crosses over lines between what Stephen is focused on and what I'm focused on. So if we wanted to sort of follow up with a smaller group to further explore that discussion, like who are the folks that would like to be included in that?
Have to have Aaron.
Yeah, I can be in there.
Nothing
Any
happens without
API.
Aaron.
Any API operator would probably be good that gets substantial traffic just for the analytics point of view. And then I would say application developers, like how are you spamming the APIs? I like Anchor. I can tell you how Anchor spams the APIs. It does a really good job at it. But other use cases of other applications would also be good to see their perspective and like how they're rapidly doing it through the development of Wharf and some of the other API clients we're working on. We're hopefully going to be able to make it so that it's easier to see that kind of spam. And then we can potentially even add optimizations in at the client side to help with spam. Just trying to think of other adjacent things to this problem that we might be able to lean on for either insight or solutions.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you want the other insight on how all the EOS Nation applications work, then Denny's the right person.
Denny's the right man.
The NFT portal,
Pomelo, all that stuff we're
Pomelo,
building is
stuff.
all, yeah, lots of feedback to provide there.
All right. Let me see here. So I'm going to just rattle off some of the topics we discussed yesterday. I don't want to talk about these right now, rather than just get quick sort of hand raises on if you'd like that to be the topic next week. So we had challenges with peering, single resource model, what the what is this? What the chain has used with anchor and power up to address usability. I didn't write that one very well because I don't know what that is. So anyway, resource pair included in 2.1, but not in Leap. A method for guaranteeing connectivity between peers. Oh yeah, he's got it right here. Perfect. You know what? I'm realizing that. Never mind. That's good. Yeah, it's interesting. Last week, actually, one of the topics that I wrote down too was nodes that are dedicated to a specific purpose, like read-only nodes and stuff like that, which came up again today. So, all right. Do any of those resonate, or do we need something else that we want to talk about next week?
Yeah, that works on my side. It's a big topic, so I think it will definitely, we'll use the full hour for sure.
Well, I think honestly, we might cover only one of them.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
partial.
Which one? Is it the specialized? It sounds like, again, timely nodes, special purpose nodes.
Yeah, maybe that would. I'd be open to that one because I can spend between and then kind of aligning on what those might be, and then I could sort of present a straw person and we could discuss. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah, that's a good one. And it's very clearly scoped. I think we can probably have a decision after that call.
Do we even have that on this list? I don't see it. Maybe I'm just blind.
Special.
But I do remember talking about it.
Yeah, no. So I think when I sent you my notes, the way my bulleting is, it's like it's at a different level. So I didn't actually include it in what I sent you.
Okay. Cool. We can get that updated, but I think that's a good, again, timely given the conversation we had today. And so we can, let's plan for that. Okay. That's the call. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
You too.